Testing my microphone. It should work.
Sounds good, Carla, go.
Perfect, okay. Let me start. Everyone, so nice to see you. It's been a long time ago I did an introduction to somebody. I'm Carla, I'm from Belgium. I joined Second Life in 2007 and Virtual Ability in 2009, if I remember well. I used to be a greeter for new people arriving and also a mentor. But gradually I got sick, and by the end of 2009 I realized something was very wrong. In April 2010 I had brain surgery to remove a brain tumor in an important emotional hub of the brain. The presence of this group has been very life-saving for me, because unlike doctors, people are willing to listen to more than just medical symptoms and do not judge. With the same remark, it's not noted on my speakeasy, as what has been said before, I'm not asking acceptance but understanding, and I get understanding here. Later on, I also had leg cancer, and my current disability is a chronic illness, namely autonomic dysfunction. I have brain damage as well as illness that affected my mental health in several ways, like PTSD and other things, too complex to explain everything. But therefore, I'm genuinely proud to present you Professor Charee Thompson of the University of Illinois, who will talk about why it's so difficult to support others with mental illnesses. Professor Thompson teaches and researches interpersonal health communication within families and between medical providers and us, people with chronic illness. Uncertainty, stigma, things like pain and even long COVID all affect us. I would love to point out that one of the results of a research which we know but always think it's just us, our perception of other people's communication about our mental struggles worsen our fear and anxiety. Does that sound familiar? Professor Thompson will explain the social support quandary and efforts to develop education to overcome it. As we say in proper English, this topic is right up my alley, and probably also many of you, if not just all of us. Please don't type or speak during the presentation, but she will be happy to answer questions afterwards. And I now proudly give the word to Professor Thompson.
Thank you, Carla, for that wonderful introduction and for sharing your story. I was not aware of it, and I appreciate your willingness to share it. Thanks to everyone for being here today and for coming to this talk. As Carla said, a core of my research is answering this question: why is it difficult to support others with mental illness? And I'm going to explain why I'm interested in this question. One of my favorite authors is Arthur Kleinman, and he once said in this very important piece about global mental health about 13 years ago, that is the social environment and moral condition that is ground zero in global mental health for persons living with mental illness. Mental health professionals themselves and family members, moreover, have repeatedly shown to be the most effective and efficient transmitters of stigma. And while I like this quote because it helps me understand something that's puzzled me for a long time, and that is how people who are supposed to help and often want to help, such as our family members and close friends, could do it so poorly. Sometimes they don't show up. Sometimes they say and do really hurtful and harmful things. I wanted to understand why and to help people become better.
Charee, would you remember to turn your slide? You should be on your second slide now.
Yes, do you see the little, looks like a chaff of wheat?
We saw the first slide, but we haven't seen the second slide.
Oh.
Did you click on the right-hand thumbnail?
Do you see the quote now?
No, but I'm going to ask iSky if she would turn slides for you.
Yeah, maybe it's a lag on my end.
think it is.
I'm hardwired, so I'm not sure what's going on.
There, I've asked Ice Guy.
Okay.
It happens sometimes, and besides, this is Friday the 13th.
You know, okay. I'm trying to move to the agenda slide. Do we see an agenda slide?
No, Ice Guy's going to get up and do your slides for you. So just keep talking. She'll catch up to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And, you know, one of my this is not in the teleprompter, but one of my major considerations in doing my research is to understand how stigma around mental illness is reinforced and perpetuated and sustained in interpersonal relationships, the close relationships. I think we tend to talk about stigma at a societal level as if it's the sort of thing that looms over us. But I think one of the issues of talking about stigma like that and studying it like that is that we don't recognize and don't, and therefore can't change sort of the everyday mundane ways that we talk about mental illness in our relationships that perpetuates stigma. And I'll talk about some of that language today. So our agenda. First, I want to talk to you about why support is critical, just a brief overview, tell you what we know and kind of speak to my own research journey. And then I will share what I've learned are the difficult experiences of feeling like there's no, quote, good way to support someone living with a mental illness. Finally, I want to conclude by sharing some very practical tips that you and people close to you that you can teach your own support providers can both support your relationship and the environment in which that you exchange support, as well as providing some tangible tips for improving communication for the supporter themselves. So I want to give you some tips for improving your relationships as well as the way that you provide support to others. Okay, so what do we know? We know that support is critical. As I've sat here through some of the sessions today, it's very clear to me that we all understand and know that social support helps us with our mental health and well-being. In particular, we know that it seems pretty commonsensical, but a growing literature documents how social support is critical in the context of mental health. And in particular, in a recent review of research, scholars have found that social support is related to higher rates of remission, fewer symptoms, and greater perceived quality of life among those with mental health issues. Sorry about that. However, we also know from our own everyday experiences and from the research that often support that we get is absent, poor quality, and even harmful. People living with mental illness repeatedly say that others' support failings are stigmatizing at worst and uninformed and ignorant at best. And when I say uninformed and ignorant at best, I'm thinking about sort of the toxic positivity things that people say, including like, look on the bright side, at least it's not X'd, or, you know, at least you woke up this morning, and things like that. So there's a gradient or a range at which people can say some pretty stigmatizing and hurtful things. And so the question that guides my research then, that brings me here, is to ask the question, okay, I don't think people necessarily mean to be jerks, frankly, but why might it be difficult for them to support people living with mental illness? I left readings thinking, surely people aren't always intending to be insensitive and don't know what to do, right? And I know I myself have often struggled to say to do the right thing for family members of my own or friends or students as a professor. James, absolutely fear. So I looked to the literature to take a peek at what research says already, before I dove into research, about what are the reasons that people don't give others support. And there's kind of a list here that I'll go through. We know that people don't give support to others because of factors related to themselves, the other person, the relationship, the situation, and culture. When it comes to it's me, people say things like, I don't give support because I don't know how. I'm not very good at it. I don't see the point. It makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to seem insincere. I've got other priorities. When it comes to them, they say things like, well, that person doesn't want support or deserve it. I probably make the person feel worse. I hear this a lot with mental health. I don't want to bring it up because I'll make them feel more depressed. They already have support from other people. When it comes to the relationship, something I find over and over in my research that's also reported in the literature is that people who are not very close tend not to support each other. It's not a part of the fabric of their relationship. Sometimes it would violate privacy. Part of supporting someone is the process of disclosing. You can't help someone if you don't know what's going on. And so sometimes if you're not close, then asking the person to reveal in order to support them could be a breach of privacy. It can also be structural. It could be the situation. I don't support them because I never have an opportunity to. I don't have a way to get in touch with them. We don't live close to each other. And I added this last one about culture because a lot of my research looks at sort of the expectations, cultural expectations we have of people and how they perform their illness. I hear a lot of discourse surrounding enabling, that if I support them, then I'm just enabling their depressive symptoms. There's lots of gender discourse about emotionality, that women are just sensitive and that, men need to man up and not be weak. And so I think that also influences our everyday conversations. Okay, so I read this literature and thought, these are reasons. But this doesn't really help me understand what often feels like a dilemma, what feels like a real struggle, an embodied experience of not being able to support someone and what that feels like. And so the rest of my presentation focuses on these three things. First, I want to answer the question, what is the experience of feeling like you should be supportive and then not giving support or not giving it well? I'm going to share some answers to that question and then equip you with some assistance for your relationships and for yourself. Something I've been working on for a couple of years is something that I have coined the support quandary. Another word for a dilemma or a challenging situation in which you feel like there's sort of no right solution. I've developed this over a series of studies I'm going to share with you. One is quantitative in nature and one is qualitative in nature. And if you're familiar with either of those terms, I have this tendency in my research to try to triangulate knowledge by looking at it both with numbers and also with narrative. So in my area of study, it's commonly understood that uncertainty, the unknown, the unpredictable, the ambiguous is related to fear and anxiety, which then affects our confidence in our ability to communicate. And if you are seeing the right slide, hopefully, you see a diagram. And it's a pathway model that is hypothesizing a causal relationship between uncertainty and social support provision. So if you follow along my logic, if I have uncertainty about your mental health, it should increase my fear and anxiety. That fear and anxiety has a negative impact on my supportive communication efficacy. It's hard for me to feel confident in my ability to provide support if I have a lot of fear and anxiety. In turn, if I don't have efficacy, then I'm not going to give very good support, and that is what we hypothesized. We also hypothesized that that little box off to the left there, that relationship, that negative relationship would be exacerbated when I perceive that you communicate about your mental health in ways that I perceive as ambiguous, particularly ambiguous or unclear, or overwhelming just by sheer volume. Maybe it's a particularly tough week, etc. Okay. So to test this idea, we conducted a study of 300 adults living in the U.S. These two pie charts show you that the majority were Caucasian and had 4 years of college education. I believe we recruited this sample from Mechanical Turk, if you're familiar, and that sample tends to be a little bit younger, slightly more liberal, and a little more educated. than the general population in the U.S. They were about 34 years of age on average, I see. I apologize, and half the sample identified as female. On this slide, I have some information on the family members and friends and romantic partners, the ones with the mental illness that they reported on. They tended to be, one moment, they tended to report pretty evenly on friends, family, and romantic partners, about half of whom were female. People in the study reported that they had known about the person's mental illness for about 6 years, although the person had had the mental illness for about 10. Generally, we found that our model was supported. I left out a lot of the numerical numbers here because I think what really is important is the takeaway. So as you can see, uncertainty predicts decreases in support provision through decreases in supportive efficacy. So if you trace the green lines, uncertainty negatively predicted supportive communication efficacy, or my confidence in being able to support you, which, if I had it, it would be positively related to support provision. And in statistics, if you're unfamiliar, with an indirect path like this, arithmetically it's a negative. So overall, uncertainty negatively affects the support I say I provide because I don't feel like I'm confident in giving you support. Interestingly, we found that uncertainty actually predicts increases in support provision through decreases in fear and anxiety. We actually thought that fear and anxiety would have a negative impact on support, but we found that actually here, if I have uncertainty about your mental illness, I feel more fear and anxiety and actually report greater support provision. Okay. We found that, let's see, fear and anxiety motivated all support types. I'm sorry, I'm trying to follow along here. Okay, and if you recall with the diagram, we also predicted that in situations where I perceive that the communication that you give me or that you convey about your mental illness is either ambiguous or high in volume, that would kind of exacerbate that negative relationship. And the slide you see now with the results, this graph depicts how the negative relationship between uncertainty, relationship between uncertainty and social support efficacy is negative overall, but you see it becomes more steep with increases in both ambiguity, here it's ambiguity, and also in volume. No, this is volume, I'm sorry. So for both volume and ambiguity, it was particularly negative, the relationship between uncertainty and sort of confidence in my ability to communicate. So what does this all mean put together? The empirical data here suggests a support quandary. In one sense, uncertainty motivates support provision, at least quantity. I'm giving more support. I don't necessarily report that as particularly high quality by activating fear and anxiety. And if you can put yourself in the shoes of someone who's trying to support you, or you've tried to help someone with a mental illness, if you're really worried about them and you don't know what's going on, then perhaps you're doing anything you can, even if you don't feel like it's particularly good or helpful. But at the same time, uncertainty confuses. Uncertainty seems to undermined for forms of support that require complex communication skills, particularly emotional support and overall quality through corresponding decreases in efficacy. So on the one hand, uncertainty motivates me through fear and anxiety, but on the other hand, it kind of is paralyzing in some ways because I feel like I don't know what to say. So next, this is a quantitative study. I wanted to collect some narratives to understand the richness of this experience of feeling this quandary. And so we collected some stories. When we're in the conversation with the person, what are we trying to do and what makes it difficult to do it just right? All right. So one thing that's really important in communication that we talk about in interpersonal communication as a field is that every interaction is comprised of 3 types of goals. Typically, they're task, identity, and relationship. But in the context of mental health, it's probably that task goal is about health. It's me trying to help you have better health, to help you seek help if you need it, and to improve well-being and alleviate symptoms. Identity goals in any interaction having to do with mental health, but really in any interaction that we have with people, is centered on how I want to appear to you and how I want you to appear to others. So it's both about my identity and your identity. So when I'm supporting someone with mental illness, I want to appear supportive, compassionate, like a good mother or brother or sister or friend. At the same time, I also want you to feel to appear competent, autonomous, and feel cared for. The last goal are relational goals. And so typically in any interaction, we're motivated by desires to sort of maintain a relationship or build one, or sometimes even de-escalate or terminate one. It's not always positive, nor should we keep relationships that are harmful. And so research tells us that in any interaction, if things are really smooth, we're able to achieve all of these goals at one time. If I give gentle social support, I say, I'm able to motivate her to seek help that she needs. I check my task goal. I make her still feel like a valued human being who is worthy of care. I also look like a supportive friend. And at the same time, I strengthen our relationship. Typically, when things go well, it feels pretty smooth. But often in relationships, we find ourselves with competing goals. And by that, I mean, I really want you to seek help, but it comes at a cost to, say, our identity or our relationship. And so I'm going to go through a number of types of dilemmas or things that people say, both in my research and other research, that get at sort of these competing goals. So on the one hand, I may, in supporting someone with their mental health, want them to recognize that they have a, quote, problem without implying they're not normal. And those can feel at odds. You know, on the one hand, I want them to be aware that there's something going on. It's affecting the family or the relationship, that they're different than others. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but it's something that they need help with. But those can be at odds, because how do I go to someone and say, like, hey, I think you have a problem. It's kind of affecting all of us and making us feel on edge, without at the same time making them feel alienated or that there's something wrong with them. So that makes it hard to communicate about. Okay. The second dilemma that people often articulate is that I want to convince you to seek help, but I don't want to imply that you're weak. Particularly when we think about, I was thinking about the previous speaker's work with military or service members and veterans. I mean, this is particularly true in the culture of, say, the military, which is highly masculine, about physical strength, etc. And so I want this person I care for to be aware that they may have a problem, I want them to seek outside help and recognize that they can't deal with this on their own. Typically, people try at great lengths on their own and can't, nor should they have to. But at the same time, I recognize that boys and men hate this stuff, or at least that's the stereotype. You're taught within a culture to deal with your own problems, especially in our very individualistic society. And in general, having mental problems is often seen as a sign of weakness. So there's, again, another dilemma of identity here, particularly among identity goals and health goals, where I want them to seek help, but I also don't want them to seem weak or feel weak. Okay, another dilemma is that I want to be persistent, but I also need to be patient. And sometimes it's really hard to be persistent without feeling like you're nagging someone, or you're always bringing it up, or you're sort of like pushing them. But at the same time, if you're not persistent, will they slip through the cracks? Will they be forgotten about? I think about this all the time with my students in the classroom. I don't want to ask them every day, how are you doing, if they disclose something to me. But at the same time, I don't want them to forget that, I'm there and that I know. And so it's difficult to be persistent with someone, but also patient, and that ultimately they have to decide when and if they want to seek help. Okay, the final dilemma I want to share with you, and hopefully, I hope that These dilemmas are affirming in some ways as something that perhaps you've struggled with, and also give you a perspective of someone who's tried to perhaps support you and has struggled. And you could see, because there's so many of them, that it's a really rich area, and that there's many dilemmas that we can face with these competing goals. Finally, I want to assure, I want to assure them that I'm concerned, and I really am trying to connect and give them a chance to talk. I want to understand. I've heard understanding a lot this conference. So I want to show understanding. But at the same time, how could I ever, if I've never been to war, if I don't live in your body and I don't know your experience? So there's this dilemma in trying to show understanding, but also not having sort of the epistemic bodily sort of knowledge to be able to convey that, or suggesting that I would ever understand. So those are some of the dilemmas that I think people face that also speak to the support quandary and why it's difficult to support people. So next I'm going to turn so I've shown numerically and narratively that it can be difficult to provide support to those with mental illness. Let's talk about how we can support the relationship. I want to turn now from explaining this support quandary to some evidence-based, and probably even from your life you can speak to these ways that we can be resilient and we can be more supportive. The first thing I want to show you is that a student of mine did a study of individuals whose partners have mental health conditions. And I know it's kind of a complex figure here, but I think what's important is that there are sort of three batches of boxes you can see. And on the left side you see stress, and you can see frequency of challenges. And she hypothesized that stress prompts us to cope, and those are the boxes in the middle, the different types of coping, and coping has an effect on our relationships. What she found is that yes, when I have stress related to your mental illness as your partner, your romantic partner at least, I'm doing all sorts of coping. But in particular, I am doing more emotion-focused coping. That sounds like, oh, this is all my fault, I don't know what to do, it's rumination, it's more negatively attending to my emotions. Problem-focused coping is actually doing things to change the situation, taking you to appointments, things like that. Dyadic coping is turning towards each other and approaching your mental health as a we. And then finally, social coping is turning to friends or people outside the relationship to talk and get support. And so as you can see, stress was positively related to emotion-focused coping. And, oops, sorry, I'm trying to get through these. As you can see, stress was positively related to emotion-focused coping, as well as social coping. So when I'm stressed about your mental health, I'm kind of turning inward and feeling these negative emotions, and I'm also talking to people outside the relationship, probably because of those face-threatening things that we talked about a few slides ago. I'm doing less problem-focused coping and less dyadic coping, however. And the issue with that for relationships is when you look at that third box about relational quality, we see that emotion-focused coping is negatively related to relationship quality. So my stress prompts me to cope in ways that are not good for our relationship. And stress is negatively related to dyadic coping, which is positively related to relational quality. So at the same time I'm engaging in emotion-focused coping, which is not good for our relationship, I'm decreasing dyadic coping, which would be good for our relationship. That's the turning towards each other. So then I thought, okay, to understand how to turn towards my partner or to foster dyadic coping, I turned to some research. Okay. I put this picture of this old couch here because it reminds me of something that is really high quality and sturdy, but over time, because it hasn't been taken care of or conditioned, it's kind of falling apart and it has lots of wear and tear. And there's a theory called the theory of resilience and relational load that says that when stressors impact our relationships, it could be family relationships or romantic or friendships, they can cause wear and tear on the relationship. Okay? This is through our responses to stress that deplete our emotional resources as well as our psychological and relational resources through repeated conversations that we don't tend to approach in productive ways. And so rather than experiencing what we call relational load that wears and tears at us as individuals in our relationships, there's actually what I call a communication formula that fosters resiliency and thriving rather than relational load. And that formula is that if we take a communal orientation in our relationship, a we orientation, and we engage in relational maintenance, then when stressors come, when you have a particularly bad day with your mental health or a crisis happens, then we are better able to adjust and experience resiliency and even thriving, growing from that, than we would relational load, where we feel like one stressor starts to really chip away at our individual and relational well-being. Okay, so by communal orientation, that is what I refer to as sort of the we mentality. And you hear this in the language when you think about how perhaps in a home you grew up in or the one that you live in now, we say things like, we do this as a family, or we're in this together. I know in my house, you know, I didn't do it intentionally, but with my own children, I say like, we are Team Thompson. And so thinking of everyday life and stressors as something that you manage together makes people feel safe and secure. At the same time, in order to effectively manage stress related to mental health and relationships, we also have to engage in everyday relational maintenance. Often, I think a banking metaphor is really good here, and this is the one that the original theorists use. It's just kind of weird to think about our relationships as something that we invest in like a bank, but I think the metaphor does work. So every day, even routine, pro-social, but strategic behaviors and experiences that we have in our relationship end up being investments. And so when crises happen or we're stressed, we can pull from those reserves that we call it emotional capital. We can pull from it to help us get through the hard times, right? And we end up still staying in the black rather than going in the red, to continue the financial metaphor. And so these can be everyday things like doing something for someone, saying something kind, making someone their lunch, complimenting them, putting them in touch with someone that they need to be put in touch with, etc. So I have a question for the audience. In this presentation, I'm blending my academic conference presentation with my teaching style. So I wonder in the chat if you could share what are some things that you could do in your relationship with someone who has a mental illness right now that would be and demonstrate everyday relational maintenance. What could you do today or right now? I shared that I could call my family member who has depression. You could be present, absolutely. Absolutely, be compassionate. Oh, that's a good question. I actually think that there's been lots of relational maintenance in this conference, in this conversation. Or another way to say this is, what are some things that people have done for you as someone who may need support in the context of mental health and well-being? Maybe they've done your chores for you when you were having a day where you just couldn't do it. Listening, that's a big one. We value speaking, but not listening in our culture. Okay, I'm going to attempt to do something, so bear with me. I would like to, oh yeah, slow down and things will, they're absolutely right, absolutely. I would like you right now to jot down in any way, whether it's mentally or on a piece of technology or a piece of paper, something that you are going to commit to do today. Maybe it's after this conference you will do it, right? You will give your partner a hug. Okay? Or you could do it right now. You could take out your phone or you could pull up your chat and you could send a message to someone that lets them know you value and appreciate them or you're thinking of them. In my class, I have my students do this, and then as the class unfolds, they're free to raise their hand and tell me what the person responded with. I hope that my message here is that it only takes a brief moment to engage in relational maintenance. And the more that we can make this a habit in our relationships, the more that we can make these small everyday investments in them, so that when we face challenges and stress related to mental health, that we can draw on all these good reserves that we've built up. So if you choose to do that right now and you have something to share at the end, I would love to hear it. Okay. So for relationships, everyday support, seeing things as a we, this helps the relationship be more resilient. Let's talk about, oh, I love that, the resistor. Let's talk about support for the supporter. How can we equip people who give emotional support to those with mental illnesses to give better support? How do we know what to say or what to do? I want to give you 2 broad groupings of skills. And by give you, I mean help you develop. So one side of it's going to be broad strategies or things to think about, and then I'm going to show you a training that we've created that gives you some much more specific strategies and things that you can say. So, strategies. It's important when you want to talk to someone about their mental health or mental illness or to have them seek help that you acknowledge when it would be a good time to talk. And that includes knowing I'm going to go through these first 3 in the next slide. What I wanted to point out is that, let's see, I'll go into more detail about the first 3, but the latter 2 are about turning to friends and others for support, advice, validation, and even prayer. We don't talk much about religion in academia for a variety of reasons, but I recognize that for a lot of people, spirituality and prayer is a very important way of coping with stress and mental health and well-being and challenges associated with. And then also treating yourself positively. It can feel really hard supporting another person, and you feel like it's just never good enough, especially for something chronic for which there is no quote, cure. And sometimes I think we need to change our expectations and show a little more kindness to ourselves as support providers. Okay. So, a few strategies here. First, it's important to know when to talk. Pick the right time. Be available. There again is a way to sort of deal with that dilemma between, I don't want to nag them and keep bringing it up, but at the same time, I want them to know I'm available and I'm always there to listen. However, your tone, your body language, what you say, you want to make sure you show caring, a commitment to helping them, politeness, listening non-judgmentally, and then the way you frame it. Drawing on what I said before, frame it as a we. It's something that we can do as a family. We can go to counseling together as a couple, as a family. It's not just on you to take care of your mental health. So next, those are some broad strategies. Next, I want to work on our specific messages, and I want us to leave this talk today being able to craft a more supportive message to someone who you know has a mental illness. So I want you to think of someone close to you who has a mental illness, and I want you to think about your most recent supportive message to that person. And I want it to be like, what's the best, highest quality thing that you said? Like maybe yesterday you talked to a sibling and you told them that you love them and you don't want them to give up and you're always there to listen. So I want you to think about your most recent conversation with someone you're close to and the most supportive message that you gave them. If it helps for later, I would like you to be able to have it written somewhere, typed somewhere, or in your mind so you can retrieve it. So we want to be able to have folks like yourself, my team and I, take your baseline support and be able to enhance it through a training. And so what I'm putting in the chat here is a link to our training module that we've created. It's a pretty lightweight, speaking of access issues from earlier in the conference today, It's a pretty lightweight application that doesn't take a whole lot of bandwidth. That's easy to sort of flip through. That's based in research and theory, tried and true, so to speak. So I'm going to give everyone a couple minutes to open that link and sort of go through it and maybe skim it and see what nuggets you can pick up. And I'm going to go through it more specifically, the content here in the slides. But I wanted to show you what our training looks like. The training is really geared for everyday support providers, not caregivers, so not folks who perhaps live with someone and give like really ongoing, hands-on types of support, but everyday support providers. You can skim through that site as I continue chatting, because a lot of the material that I'll be talking about on the slides is also on the training. So the training is really about how to craft what we call person-centered messages. And they're verbal person-centered messages, so it's really about the talk. Person-centered messages are an important form of emotional support because they help others feel heard and help others make sense of their feelings. In addition, person-centered message validate the other person, helping them learn that it's okay to feel those feelings. And they also encourage reframing. This doesn't mean telling them that they shouldn't be upset. This doesn't mean telling them to get over it. But the goal is to help them reappraise or change the way that they think about the situation so that they can imagine a brighter future. So I have another communication formula for you. First, all good emotional supportive messages need to acknowledge. They need to label the emotions, which are often negative, not always, and connect to them. Show that you see them. Good person-centered emotional supportive messages also validate. It's not just enough to say, I see that you're upset. You also have to say, it's okay to feel that way. I can understand why, given all that you've been through. Doing those things, and additionally to reframing, helps them look forward to a positive future, as I said before. So, ideally, a very high person-centered message is able to do all three things. I'm going to give you some examples of messages that are low in person-centered messages. These messages minimize, criticize, or deny the other person's emotions. They're not very good at acknowledging, validating, or reframing. And so, in the contents of mental health, it may sound like that they are making people feel wrong for their feelings or they're to blame for their situation. And they often tell the other person how to behave or to feel. So, for example, well, if you'd gotten help when you first started feeling this badly, you wouldn't be in this mess now. Why are you sad? You have so much to be grateful for. Another low person-centered message might be, you need to get out of the house and stop moping. And these are actually messages taken from other studies I've done about health contestations, or when we kind of dismiss people's health issues. Moderate person-centered messages are decent at all three, right? They acknowledge the situation, but maybe not the feelings of the person in it. They often try to distract instead of sort of confront the emotions head on and validate them. So they may sound good on the surface, but not have a lot of depth, okay? They may sound like, I'm so sorry to hear you're not feeling great. Well, if that sounds rough, let's go get some ice cream and forget about it. Friends get busy. That's why they aren't spending much time with you. Don't take it personally. So these are better, as you can tell, but they're really still not as good as they could be. So let's strive to create high person-centered messages, which are those that encourage the person to feel their emotions and provide a safe space to talk about their feelings. They don't try to cheer the person up or help them forget or distract them. And instead, they create a space for someone to express and explore their feelings. So that might sound like, oh gosh, it sounds like you're a little relieved, but also unsure of the future. I know you're doing your best, and I'm here to listen and to help in any way I can. Why do you think you feel so sad right now? That's completely understandable. Tell me more about what you're going through. I'm proud of you for opening up. Notice in these, they create the space linguistically through these discursive strategies of being able to create literally space for people to explore their feelings. So my hope is in that talking through some of these that you can think about how you can improve your own emotional support that you give to others and be able to have language to talk about why sometimes when you get messages from other people, they don't feel so great. Like when some people give you support and it's on the surface okay, they say like, oh, I'm so sorry you're going through a hard time. And you're like, oh, why didn't that really like change how I feel? Or why did that feel very supportive? Well, today we've talked about how that's a moderate person-centered message. It could be better. It could have given you space to talk about your feelings. So I want you to go back to that message that I asked you to recall a few slides ago, recalling that that conversation with someone where you gave them support and you felt it was like pretty good support. How would you revise it? What would you add or change or say something differently to really boost it so it's high person-centered, that it validates, it acknowledges, it helps them reframe? Give you a second to think about it. I think something, if I'm being honest, that I could work on is I'm good at seeing emotions and validating them, but often not good at asking people to explore them. I kind of just summarize back what they've said to me and say it's okay to feel that way, but I don't say like, why do you feel that way? Or, let's explore those feelings. I could do a much better job of doing that myself. So to put everything together today, I think in order to be to overcome the support quandary where we really want to help someone but we don't know how and we often don't feel like we're good at it, I think we can do everyday things. I think we can approach challenges and not just mental health issues but everything in the relationship more as a we. We could do more relational maintenance, these everyday things, and it's not just the things you say, it could be the things you do. It could be ironing a person's shirt if they, or taking their stuff to dry clean. It's things that we do and say on an everyday basis. We can improve the emotional supportive messages that we give so that they're high person-centered. And I try to have you practice a little bit today, and you have that link to that training module if you'd like to go through it in its entirety. And then finally, I just want to reiterate that we should be kind to ourselves as support providers. I think the best we can do is take feedback, ask for direction from people from whom we want to support, and also resolve that we're trying to do our best. Thank you very much. I'm happy to have a discussion and take your questions.
Dr. Thompson, if you'd like, I'd be happy to read the questions in the chat for you.
Yeah, that would be great because I might have missed some as we were going along.
Okay, I'll do that for you.
I apologize for the sort of slide issue and things not being synced up very well.
Lily Ruthie says, I'm thinking about how to communicate to others about how they can be more supportive to you. Do you have any resources or tips?
Yes. Let me make sure I'm understanding this. I lost it. How to communicate to others about how like how to give people direction on how to support you. Yeah. So for instance, if I identify as someone who has depression and I want my mom to give me better support, I think going back to our tri-part model of goals, when I think about giving my mom feedback on her support and I think she could be better, I have to make sure that I give her those tips, that I tend to the identity goals and also the relational goals because I like my relationship with my mom. So I might say, Mom, I really value our relationship and I love talking to you and I love that you listen to me and I feel like a safe space where I can talk about my mental health challenges. And I know you're doing your best, and you're always so good at making sure that you check in with me. I would really appreciate it if, you would do X, Y, Z. So notice how I sort of walk through like attending to the relational things, the identity things, and then the ask, which is more of the task thing on how to get better, etc. So I think affirming the person's identity in the relationship is important. Hopefully I answered that, the question.
Okay, the next question comes from MEMRS, and they ask, do you think it's possible that other people's mental illnesses can trigger your own unresolved issues, trauma, etc. as well? We may be scared that if we get too involved, we'll lose hold of our own tenuous grasp on well-being.
Oh gosh, I loved how that's framed, our own tenuous grasp. Yeah, absolutely. I think, there again is a tension and a dilemma over caring for yourself and caring for others. I think you have to protect yourself and supporting someone, particularly if it's triggering for you. There might be ways that you can support them that that aren't as triggering or aren't directly triggering. Like perhaps the emotional support is particularly hard for you. I think this is for you to reflect on what is triggering about it. If talking about it and the emotional aspects is what's really triggering, perhaps you decide to close that off for your own mental health. And you say, you know what, I'm going to spend time with the person and we're going to watch movies together. And this is how I'm going to give support. And that would be my advice.
Okay, Gentle has a comment. She says, Charee, thank you for being so honest about the problems of providing support for our family members and friends with mental illnesses. And especially thank you for giving us concrete suggestions about how we can improve our support.
Thanks, Gentle. You embody everything that I hope people learn.
Let me see, Lily Ruthie clarified what she was asking before.
Oh, I'm sorry I didn't answer that correctly. What's the clarification?
She said, I'm thinking about how to communicate to others about how they can be more supportive to you. Do you have any? Oh, sorry, that was Lori Fine just cutting and pasting the question. And Linda Ruthie said, thanks, yes. So there you go.
Okay, good.
Luke has a comment. She says, I suspect one of the most common reasons people cannot empathize or support others properly with regard to mental health is because they can't imagine the other's situation. The Hercule Poirot character said, you attribute always to others the sentiments that you yourself experience. And the inverse is also true. If you don't experience a particular sentiment, you often don't know how or when to attribute it to others. Also, many of the support methods described, body language, emotional framing, showing, displaying, etc., I am unable to understand or produce correctly in the physical world. And in fact, I constantly offend people without meaning to.
Oh, Luke, there's so much there to unpack. I'm going to answer this or respond to this in two parts. I think the earlier part of what you're talking about is something that I've been exploring about what I call epistemic challenges. That the fact that inherently, because I do not live in your body, I can never understand what it is to experience what you experience. I do think that that is not an excuse for not being a good support provider. I'm not suggesting you're saying that, but I find in my research that people often use that as an excuse, or they fall into traps of relying on heuristics that are particularly damaging. So they'll say like, well, I don't know what depression is like, and then they'll compare it to, someone else's experiences they heard and say, well, she can't be depressed because that's not how my cousin had depression. And it's like, well, I mean, you don't know how either of them experienced depression, so how can you compare and dismiss someone? So my point is to say, like, when we have uncertainty, a lot of times because we don't live in someone's body, we have to be careful what we fill that gap with. And that gap cannot be suspicion or stereotypes or assumptions or some of these cliche phrases that may seem harmless, but actually are quite harmful. Like some of my research is about how we say dismissive things that don't seem so dismissive. Like, oh, have you, someone is saying they're having a tough time, and you say like, oh, well, have you seen a counselor yet? And it's like, okay, I just told you I had a hard time. I need emotional support. And you were asking me and suggesting I haven't done enough to take care of my mental health. and things like that. So the first part of what Mook is saying, I'm saying absolutely. And I hope that people, like I said, choose not to feel that, fill that embodiment gap with things that could be harmful. And then the second part, I absolutely hear you. I think we have a bias, particularly in my line of research and in my area of the field, where we focus so much on the talk. And we also focus on crudely kind of like nonverbal and verbal behaviors. But we know that things like just being present and listening are highly valued and grossly understated and understudied as from a researcher's perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. We have reached the top of the hour, so I would imagine that people are ready for some loud applause. Thank you very much for a fantastic presentation. Polaris, I noticed that you had an extra question, but Gentle is talking to you about that. So I guess we are done. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.